guys, welcome back. As promised in the previous video, this is part 2 of a bunch of Super NES games that completely blew my mind back when I played them in the 90s. If you haven't watched that first video, then maybe go check that one out before you yell at me for not including one of your favorites in this one. But if you're all set, then let's get this video started with a game that made me completely rethink an entire genre of games when it was released back in 1992. Mario Kart for the Super NES was one of those games that came out of nowhere for me. Not being the biggest fan of racing games at the time, I wasn't paying much attention to the previews of Mario Kart in magazines. Everything I saw just kind of made it look like a little kid racing game that just didn't interest me in the least. And that's coming from someone that would get overly excited if they saw a new Disney platform game in the same magazine. But one day my local Walmart got a Super NES demo kiosk just for promoting Mario Kart, so I reluctantly wandered over to try it out, and within a few minutes, it had completely changed my mind. This definitely wasn't baby's first racing game like I thought it was. Instead, this was closer to something like my beloved RC Pro-Am on the NES, just with Mode 7 used to create a more 3D-like driving experience. And it did look incredible in motion at the time. But the main thing that won me over was just how much fun it was to play. Getting around the track was entertaining enough, but the addition of multiple items you could launch at other players really sold the deal. Green shells, banana peels, and a bunch of other stuff that could either be the best or the worst thing that could happen to you during a race was all here. Yes, this all sounds like standard Mario Kart now, but this was pretty novel for the time. And if you managed to play with a friend, then it's very likely that you created lifelong enemies thanks to just how competitive Mario Kart could be if you had someone else around. I had so much fun with this one when it originally came out. It ended up being one of those games that I rented on a regular basis since it just never really got old. Me and my cousin would sit and play this one for hours together, trying to beat the different speed classes, while also trying not to throw punches at each other when an errant green shell knocked one of us out of first place. I guess the worst thing about the original Mario Kart is just that. It's the first one. It's arguably the worst Mario Kart game that's ever come out. So many other better versions of Mario Kart exist now that it's probably not worth going back to this one unless it's just for nostalgia purposes. And that's why I still occasionally go back to it. Because I'll always remember playing that demo at a Walmart one Sunday and feeling like Mario Kart for the Super NES was the start of something really special. And to be fair, I think I was right on that one. Mega Man X for the Super NES was a game that made me realize what I'd been missing out on. Now I'm gonna absolutely get thrashed in the comments for this, but I was just never the biggest Mega Man fan on the NES. Yes, I played Mega Man 2 and enjoyed it, but I never felt like I needed to run out and play any more of them like a lot of kids did. When I saw Mega Man X hit the Super NES though, I decided to give it a try to see if it could change my mind. Of course, this is still a Mega Man game, so you're essentially fighting your way through a bunch of stages that you can choose from at the start, with the goal being to defeat each boss and obtain their weapon power. Yes, if you've played Mega Man before, then I think you know what you're getting into with X. The difference being that this is an edgier Mega Man. This seemed like Capcom was trying to say, forget those NES games, kids, because this isn't your grandma's Mega Man. You're now playing in a bleak, mechanized dystopia with characters that actually talk to each other. There's a full backstory and everything now. Dr. Light's dead, man. How crazy is that? And beyond that, the game now lets you do other crazy stuff like dash around and wall jump. You can even get into a mech suit and punch things until they explode. Yes, the basics of Mega Man may still be here, but this was so much more. Now I will say that one reason why I wasn't the biggest fan of the NES games was just how difficult they could be. And while I like difficult games, just put your pitchforks away, for whatever reason I just never cared for Mega Man's type of difficulty. Maybe it's the better movement or less trial and error, but Mega Man X feels a lot more forgiving. I just had a lot more fun in this one trying out the different stages to see how far I could get, which was something that always felt like a chore on the NES. And even when X does get difficult, I never felt like it was the game being cheap with unavoidable spike pits or bottomless holes, something that the NES games were filled with. In the end, Mega Man X felt like it breathed new life into a series that had gotten pretty tired on the NES, even with the people that called themselves Mega Man fans. And while Mega Man X wasn't a complete departure from those earlier games like Super Castlevania was, it still felt like a whole new game on the Super NES. Whatever secret sauce X had going for it was exactly what I needed to finally get sucked into the series. I don't know if it was the fresh coat of paint, more of an emphasis on the story, or just all the fun new stages, but Mega Man X definitely seemed like it was the Mega Man that was made for me. So if you are a Mega Man fan, or even if you're not, go check out Mega Man X. It really is that good. Starfox for the Super NES felt like I was playing something that had no right being on the system. Like Donkey Kong Country, Starfox was being hyped to the moon by Nintendo and various magazines at the time. And one look at it could tell you why. This was a fully polygonal 3D game on the Super NES. No Mode 7 trickery or crazy scaling here. This was the real deal. I was initially skeptical though because I had played fully 3D games on the Super NES before, and the results are pretty tragic. So I couldn't really see Starfox being much better. But it was supposed to have this fancy new thing called the Super FX chip that would go a long way in making the game feel like something more than just a slideshow. I managed to grab Starfox the day it hit my video store, and 10 minutes in, I was shocked at what I was playing on the Super NES. Yes, the polygons are the most basic thing you've ever seen, with everything just kind of looking like squares or triangles, but it actually ran pretty well. It may not have been the smoothest thing that I'd ever seen, but it moved fast enough to give the impression of motion, and really that was the best you could ask for on the Super NES back then. Of course you couldn't fly around everywhere since the game is an on-rail shooter, but it at least gives you enough freedom to dodge and barrel roll your way through stages, making you feel like you're in an interactive 3D world. The actual action wasn't bad either, as shooting down enemy craft and bosses felt pretty good, as long as the frame rate could keep up anyway. And for the most part, it does, but there are definitely some sections of the game that feel a bit too sluggish thanks to the Super FX chip grinding to a near halt due to all those fancy polygons on screen. Still though, the variety in stages and enemies kept things fresh, along with a branching path through the game that lets you take different approaches with each playthrough. Starfox was an awesome experience on the Super NES at the time. Going back to it these days though, it can feel a bit rough. It's still playable and decently fun, but it's much harder to ignore the frame rate and sluggish pace of the game now than it used to be. Just like Donkey Kong Country, this is something you just kinda had to be there for when it came out to fully appreciate what Starfox accomplished on the Super NES. And to me anyway, I still think it's an incredible achievement on a system that shouldn't even be able to run something like this. It's always the game that I go back to if I want a little bit of that early 3D gaming nostalgia. Out of This World for the Super NES was like nothing else I'd ever played at the time. This is one that I originally saw playing on a TV outside of a Babbage's store in the mall. Hit me up in the comments if you even know what a Babbage's is. Anyway, the TV was showing previews of the PC version of the game, which looked like you were watching an actual movie. I couldn't believe anything that looked like this was something that you could actually control. Everything looked so smooth and cinematic. It was just on a completely different level than anything else on store shelves. So when I saw this one get ported to the Super NES, I couldn't wait to see what developers could pull off. Because if it was even half as good as the PC version, I'd probably fall out of my chair. And that's exactly what happened when I finally got my hands on it. While the Super NES version may not look or run quite as good, all of the cinematic goodness of the PC version was somehow still here. Even when you first start the game up, you get the same incredible opening cinematic from the PC version. Seeing this by itself on the Super NES wasn't enough to sell me on the game. The rest of the visuals made it over as well, just in lower resolution form. So from a visual standpoint on the Super NES, Out of This World gets an A+, no doubt about it. The minimalist art style and flat look of the game still really looks good to this day. Playing the game though is where the Super NES port starts to really show its issues. Mainly the slowdown when there's just too much happening on screen. Sometimes plummeting the frame rate into the single digits, and this can happen a lot as you play. It didn't help that Out of This World takes some time to get used to as well, since this isn't your typical platform game that I'd been playing for years. This is much slower. Everything feels like it takes precise timing and movement to get everything exactly right. And if you didn't, it was game over. There was no room for error in this game. And when everything's running at 5 frames per second on the Super NES, well, you'll be seeing that game over screen a lot more than you probably would if it wasn't running like complete butt. But even with those issues, I still kept coming back to this one over and over again because I just wanted to see what was next. It was one of those games that just completely fascinated me from beginning to end. For all the games on this list, Out of This World may be the one that had the biggest lasting impression on me. The seamless world filled with all these crazy cinematic moments really got into my head big time. It genuinely felt like you were playing a movie all the way up until the credits started rolling on screen. Unfortunately, I can't really recommend the Super NES port these days since there are remasters of the original PC version available on modern consoles, and that's probably the one that you should play if you've never experienced Out of This World before. Still, Out of This World on the Super NES was an incredible game for us folks that didn't have a PC at the time, and personally, I'm glad it was there, warts and all. It's one that I still associate with some of my best memories on the Super NES. And that's going to do it for this time. Let me know if you happen to see any games that blew you away back then as well, or even just something that I didn't even mention. For as many crazy new games that come out these days that try to impress with super high-definition graphics, I honestly can't say that any have come close to the experience that I had with these over 30 years ago. It was just a different time, I guess. Plus, I was a kid, and breakfast cereal could get me excited back then. But at least I got to have those experiences, and that's what really matters. Anyway, thanks for watching this video, guys, and be sure to give it a like if it didn't make you visibly uncomfortable, and maybe a sub if you really, really liked it. But that's going to do it for me this week. I'll be back next time with a bunch more games to talk about, and until then, thanks for watching.